Hello and welcome to the Career Journey podcast, No Wrong Choices. This episode features Father Dave Dwyer, host of Busted Halo on SiriusXM and one of the most recognizable voices in Catholic media. I'm Larry Samuels, and I'll be joined in just a moment by Larry Shea. Before we begin, please be sure to like, follow, or subscribe to the show wherever you're listening right now. Let's get started. Now joining No Wrong Choices is Father Dave Dwyer. Father Dave is a Paulist priest, the executive director of Busted Halo Ministries, host of the Busted Halo show on SiriusXM, and author of Mass Class, Your Questions Answered. Father Dave, thank you so much for joining us.
Great to be here. Great to see you guys again. We worked in radio back in the day. It seems like it's so long ago.
It was quite a while ago.
Long before, I guess, sort of around the beginning of podcasting, right? Like we were competing then. I don't know what we're doing now.
No, now we're one big happy family. We're a unity.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right.
Great to see you.
Well, Father Dave, I can go through a list to tell people who I think you are, but nobody knows who you are better than you. So if you would, please set the stage. Who is Father Dave and what do you do?
Ooh, okay. Both of those things. Who am I? What do I do? I am a Catholic priest. That's both who I am and what I do. It's more than a job. It's a vocation. It's a vocation that I had a little later in life. When I was in first grade, playing with a tape recorder, pretending I was a radio host. And so it goes all the way back that far. And then in college, majored in television and radio production, was working for MTV and HBO after college as a director. Did radio really in college. I'd never done radio professionally after I graduated. I did host a morning show. That was the last time I was a morning person. Did host a morning show in college. But when I had the call to priesthood, I was about 28 years old. And somehow I was a little confused because I really thought, it wasn't like I had not been a person of faith or a practicing Catholic before that. I really thought God kind of wanted me to do that whole thing, be a television director, to be in the media and all that. And so I was a little confused. I'm sort of like, well, what do I do with this? Is this the right way? And when I started articulating that, many people pointed me toward a particular group within the Catholic Church. We call them a religious order, religious community. Some people may have heard of the Jesuits because they got a lot of basketball schools, so kind of like the Jesuits, but one that does a lot with media called the Paulist Fathers. And so after discerning and spending some time, praying and then being immersed and deciding and being trained and all that, I was ordained a priest 25 years ago, coming up on 26. So I've been a priest for 25 years. Now, the what do I do question, that I've got a whole PowerPoint on that. I should just send that to you guys. This is pretty cool. Because I do have...
It's probably 19 pages
It's
long.
a lot of pages. I have several jobs. My job is a little different than a typical priest. And I remember when I was bumping into you guys at the halls of the Rockefeller Center studios of SiriusXM Radio, a lot of people would say, this guy's walking around, he's got like a priest collar on. That's got a... Don't you have to go to work? Don't you have a parish and people? So my community, the Paulist Fathers, has designated that my primary ministry can be this media ministry. So while I do work at a church and I celebrate Mass, if there's any Catholics listening, they know Mass. That's where we go on Sunday and such, holidays. So I do that, and I do baptisms and weddings and all that kind of stuff and hear confessions, but not full-time. I kind of do that a little less full-time than a normal priest would because, if you've seen headlines, there's not as many priests as there used to be. So any priest that's working today is working overtime. So I do a little less of that piece and a lot of radio. We have a website that we do with Busted Halo where I've got a whole staff there, and I kind of consult and let the experts in print journalism deal with that. And I also was elected and appointed to leadership in my religious community. So what I was doing all day today had nothing to do with media or, I did celebrate the sacraments. I did have Mass earlier today. So I had the noon Mass and then a lot of conference calls and Zoom meetings about various, structural stuff and institutional stuff and all that. This kind of stuff that you don't, when you're having that warm and fuzzy moment, like 30 years ago, ooh, God wants me to be a priest. It wasn't this stuff that I did today that I was really looking forward to, like budgets and, lawyers and all that kind of stuff. So that's a little bit about what I do.
Yeah, all of that sums up to, I always describe you as the coolest priest in the entire world. I swear, that's how I describe it. So, yes.
Larry, you may remember, who was it? Scott. His name was Scott. He worked in promotions. Tall, thin guy.
Scott.
Yeah, I'm forgetting. But anyway, he once told me that because it is radio. And most of the time, unlike here we are on Zoom, people don't really see you. There would be occasionally like a day that I would come in and I wouldn't be wearing like the full-on priest collar outfit. I'd be a little more of a casual. And I'm like, well, nobody's going to see that. But he told me once that he was always worried whenever he saw me like that because, in your words, I was such a cool priest that he thought that I was kicked out. Because I was too cool. So from then on, ever since he said that, I would come in every day. I got to wear the uniform just to make sure people don't think I'm kicked out.
I love it. I love that so much. Cool. So let's start at the beginning because we're going to talk about all of the stuff that you just went through.
Sure.
So media was the initial goal. So you said you were a young boy playing with a tape recorder.
I was.
And what was the goal back then? You wanted to be a producer and work in TV?
Well,
were you thinking?
I don't know if I had too many goals in first grade, but I think the goal was like having fun with my across the street neighbor. Because neither of us were sports. We weren't playing the sports teams. So after school, we'd be like, okay, my mom had. Who was she a big fan? Oh, Herb Alpert and the Tijuana Brass on vinyl.
Oh, wow.
And so we'd
My
use that as like the
father
theme
loved that.
song, like ba-da-ba-ba-ba-da-ba. And it was, hi, welcome to whatever it was we called the show. So we were just goofing around, and that was fun. And then I kind of realized as I got into like high school, it's like, no, I really enjoy this. I'm passionate about this. I want to do this. Yeah. My public school had like a TV station with these cameras that looked like ray guns they would use on the Millennium Falcon. It wasn't like any kind of normal TV looking cameras. And so in high school, I really got the bug. And so when I started looking for colleges, it was communications colleges like Syracuse University, where I eventually went, and Ithaca, and Northwestern, and Emerson, and those kind of places. And, then I kept pursuing. And in college, I did both radio and television. So I was behind the scenes, more on the producing, directing side. And at Syracuse, you really could. There was a pretty professional school, so we could actually do stuff. And we had a radio station that I was working at that had ratings in the market, and I had the morning show. And it was definitely fun all throughout college. And then I believed I was going to dive into that kind of as my professional work, and I did. I worked for probably 6 or 7 years before I became a priest, kind of working in television.
So was religion a part of your life back then? Or not really?
Yeah. Yes. No, it definitely was. So my experience of the call to the priesthood was not from sex, drugs, and rock and roll, even though I was working for MTV. So I could see how you would think that would be the case. No, in fact, I was one of these fairly religiously practicing guy, even when I was working in, quote, the industry of media. And I remember because I was still, my final job, I'd worked at MTV. I directed for Comedy Central when it launched, worked with Jon Stewart, in fact, at Comedy Central before the big Daily Show. And then things ended there, and I was back at MTV. I think I was directing just kind of like studio stuff with the VJs and some musical performances. I directed, my first time I was ever directing live television was the day that Kurt Cobain died.
Oh, wow.
And MTV had to kind of go live emergency, and I happened to be the guy in the studio. I wasn't one of their top directors, but I was the guy that was there. Everybody else was out doing like, Club MTV or Spring Break or something.
Wow.
And that was a moment, but that was also right around the time that I began having these little sort of nudges and inklings of discerning the priesthood. And in fact, it was after I had my major kind of vocational experience in Denver, Colorado. Pope John Paul II came for what they call World Youth Day. So it's a lot of young people in their 20s or their teens. And the Pope kind of like riles them up and goes, hey, be good Catholics and whatnot. And a lot of people at these experiences do have sort of like, ooh, maybe I should do this with my whole life or whatnot. And so it was, I'd had that, and I started to think about priesthood. And then I had this experience of directing live television, which I'd never done before. That was kind of a career milestone. And yet everything went well. It couldn't have gone better in terms of my career. And I just really had this sense that it was not the fulfillment that I was being attracted to in this other avocation/vocation. And one of the people, when I began discerning the priesthood, one of the people that I went to for advice is like, how do I know? Because I'm good at this and I like this, but now it feels like almost a different direction. Sure. How do I know? And one of the words that really kind of surfaced was fulfillment. Right. And I look back at times that in high school that I was helping out with youth groups. You asked if I'd always been all along. So yes, I'd always been all along involved in my faith. going to church and being involved in youth group and in college running retreats and always kind of being the guy up there giving talks and whatnot. But I always thought that, that's what people do when they're done with their job. Like, of course, I'm not going to be a priest. That's, only strange people do that. I'm going to be a normal person. And then when I'm done with my job, I'll help out at church because church is cool. And then it was really reflecting on some of those moments, even from like high school youth group that I was part of or running retreats in college, that I look back and I thought, that kind of stays with me more. It makes more a difference to me that I made a difference in somebody's life on a college retreat than I could pat myself on the back about my TV resume. So it was really right around that time that I started pushing more towards, this has been great. It's been a great run. It was fun. Maybe I'll never do anything like this again. Little did I know. And then,
right.
And then kind of launched into more the priesthood career and really thought that would be sort of left behind. It wasn't God's plan.
No, not at all. Let's reflect on that 1993 listening to the Pope speak. I mean, because it obviously changed your life. Do you ever reflect on what would have happened if you hadn't gone to Denver? What your life would have been like? Would it have been different? Would you have found this perhaps, or would it have just been completely different?
I think probably I would have stumbled on it in a different way, because it was really, I now look back and I can see a lot of things moving towards that. In the same way that I can look back and say there was a reason why I was playing with a tape recorder when I was in first grade, and why I was leading retreats and youth group in high school, and those all kind of came together. So I think so. I mean, in really religious speak, we talk about it being God's plan, and that was all kind of in the works, and I just had to discern and listen to it. But I do think so. I mean, I think eventually I would have gotten here.
When you were younger, were there ever any thoughts of the priesthood at all?
No. In fact, it was weird, because when I was in seminary, most of the other guys were telling me stories that like blew my mind. Like they grew up pretending to play mass, like at home, where you've got like a little card table and you're like putting on, mom's smock or something like that. And I'm like, no, that was never me. No, that was never me.
Okay.
No.
So when you look back at your time in college, you're at the radio station. You're Happy Dave. Is that what I read?
You did.
You were
read
the
that.
morning guy.
So this is an interesting origin story. If we could do like the Peter Parker Spider-Man sitch.
Of course.
So there was a freshman year in college. I was on an all-guys floor. The dorm was like mixed. So like the next floor up was the girls' room. Take the elevator. Okay. But it was this is the 80s. So we're still pretty traditional on the guys sleep over here and the girls sleep over here. So it was all-guys floor. And it was a pretty big dorm. So on my floor, I forget how many total rooms or number of guys there was. I'm going to say maybe it was like 30. But there was 5 guys named Dave.
Oh, geez.
So
you were the happy one.
Yep. My roommate, ever since even before he came to college, he admitted this, he was always the person in anybody's friend circle that would bestow the nicknames. And he did. So there was, thankfully I didn't get this one. Crazy Dave. That was one of the guys. So Crazy Dave was one. One other guy we called Andy, I'm not sure why, even though his name was Dave. And then my roommate just started calling me Happy Dave.
That's great.
So, and the only people that knew that were the people on the floor, and primarily for the purpose of distinguishing which Dave we're talking about. Not that this is suddenly going to be a lifelong brand, Right. So then I joined the campus radio station, one of 3 actually at Syracuse University. This was the student one run, and we did, at the time you'd probably call it like 80s alternative music. And I was, you have to start when you're, when you're a freshman getting involved. You got to start like the overnight. You guys have probably done both the overnight shifts.
I did, for sure.
So this was 1 to 4 in the morning. And the summer before I arrived at college, Syracuse University, there was some issue with the broadcast antenna that they was making like holes in the roof or flooding in the roof of one of the dorms, and they had taken the antenna down. So we were only live to people on cable television on the channel that had the channels.
Right.
That's the only place where we were heard. And so, it's 2 in the morning. Later in life, I might think, this is really good use of my time. But, you're dumb and you're 18 and whatnot.
And you're learning. So, whatever, right?
And when I first signed up, I remember meeting the program director, and he says, what's your name? Dave Dwyer. And he goes, this is literally what he said, and I remember it still. Dave Dwyer, that's a great radio name. Don't ever change it. because it's got the alliteration, the punchy, the D's. Dave Dwyer. And so up until that point, there I am putting the needle on the record and playing Rick Springfield. I remember that. And then I would say, hey, this is Dave Dwyer with you. And then one night at probably 2 or 3 in the morning, the Happy Dave thing that they all called me at the dorm all of a sudden just came to the fore. And it was like, do you guys ever remember, you're both roughly my generation, so you might remember the classic sitcom Taxi?
Of course.
Of course. Reverend Jim.
So Reverend Jim, they did an origin story of Reverend Jim. Do you remember the origin story? They flash back and he's in college and he has a brownie that's kind of laced or whatever.
That's right.
So Reverend Jim is like this really stay buttoned up kind of guy and very formal. And he takes one bite and his whole face changes into that standard Reverend Jim face. And that was the moment. That's the moment that I felt like that Happy Dave. Because once I said Happy Dave, I was no longer the nerdy, inexperienced freshman. Suddenly, I was like a radio professional all of a sudden at 2 o'clock
totally
in the morning.
fit.
Hey, it's Happy Dave with you.
That tracks. That tracks.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, when you look back at that time, so you're in college, it's the 80s, people are going out, you're at a radio station, et cetera, et cetera. The crew of people that you were hanging out with, I guess there was Angry Dave, there was, I don't know how many other Daves there were, there was Party Dave.
Yeah.
So would that crew of people be surprised that you wound up where you did and that you're doing what you're doing?
Well, I do remember that my roommate, this is not exactly the answer to your question, but my roommate, remember I said he was the one that gave me the nickname. So after I started using it on the air and then later on was like DJing in clubs and I was actually advertised in the local newspaper, like, come here, Happy Dave on Friday night. He's like, oh God, I created a monster. Like he never saw that coming. And I mean, I think I was involved very much, so I got way too involved when I got to college. I joined too many clubs and auditioned for plays and realized, suddenly there's not enough time in the day. So I was very involved in what is oftentimes on college campuses called the Newman Club or Newman Association, which is like the Catholic club. So I was very involved with them, and they knew that I was on the radio, and those were just like two of my main paths. I was also doing TV too, so I was like producing and directing TV on the student-run TV station. I was on the air, the radio station, and volunteering and running retreats at I guess I was always pretty busy. Now that you mention that, Larry, I guess I don't like moss to grow on my feet, so I was very busy.
No.
So I think both of those constituencies knew of the other, so neither of them were surprised. I mean, this is nerd central right now. So another friend of mine from the Newman Club, we were both on the radio. And by the way, once I started using Happy Dave, then I'm not going to pat myself on the back, but then suddenly everybody needed an adjective. So there was Jumpin' John, and there was,
that's fantastic.
Started a trend.
So I did. I mean, obviously I didn't, not in radio I didn't, but there I did. So there was a lot of adjectives, and there was other Daves too on the radio. So there was Baby Dave, there was Dancing Dave. I mean, it's the common names.
Baby Dave.
Baby Dave. He was like, when I was a senior, he was a freshman, and he was like, I want to be like
Baby
him.
Dave.
Baby Dave. Yeah, exactly. So I was talking about the nerdiness. So I remember one evening that we're hanging out at the Catholic Club, Newman Association, and these are a bunch of our church friends, and these are people that we, I go to mass with and run the retreats with, and I popped in a cassette of what we call my air check. That's like when you record yourself on the air, but you take out all the music, so it's just a tape of you talking.
Sure.
And I'm like, ooh, listen to that. Ooh, listen to me talking up that song. Hey, wow. That takes some kind of gall to subject other people to that, other than someone that's hiring you for a job.
Yeah, you're trying to get work.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, great. Yeah. That's cool. Can we talk about mass now? That we'd really prefer that.
So it sounds like you got a lot of experience then in college. So what happens after college? How did you get your first job? Was it at MTV or somewhere else?
Yeah, so after my junior year, I interned at MTV. They got a lot of good internships at Syracuse. It's close to New York, and there's a lot of connections, a lot of alums. And every time I'm watching any kind of sports game, I say, oh, look, there's McDonough, there's Tirico, there's everybody with Syracuse. So yeah, I interned at MTV. Back then, I mean, this is summer of 85, so it's still the original VJs, and it's still music television with videos and intros and some other stuff. I interned in the department that at the time they called special programming, which now of course it all has turned into.
Right.
But even then it was more music and rock based. It was like what they called the rockumentaries. Remember those?
Sure.
So I worked on some of those. I remember my very first task as an intern. It was right after Live Aid had happened. So Live Aid was the first big one of these fundraiser concerts, and it was hours, like 13 hours or something like that. It was the one where Phil Collins flew from, on the Concorde. He flew on the Concorde. He performed in London, and then he flew to Philadelphia and performed in Philadelphia. So MTV had just done that, so I wasn't around for that. But what apparently and this was in the early days of MTV. So this was before like their first real big event. Because prior to that, it was like, let's go spring break. All right, everybody's running around in bikinis, and let's give them some T-shirts and stuff. So this was a major undertaking and part of this special programming department. So my task, because apparently they hadn't done this, was to log the entire thing, meaning what happens at like 10:02, the host comes out and introduces Madonna, and she wriggles around on the stage for a couple of minutes, and then she does another song. So I had to watch all of Live Aid, and with like a pen and a loose leaf pad, and write down what it was so that we would know
from like 9 in the morning until whatever time.
No, there were some days that I was there. I remember being there after like everybody went home because I'm like a junior in college. I'm sitting there at the office, the headquarters of MTV. I'm like using somebody else's desk and TV, and I'm like putting my feet up, looking at the skyline, going, "Oh, this is pretty cool. I like this industry."
That's cool, Dave.
Yeah. So that was cool, Dave. That was cool, Dave, doing that. So I logged all that, and then that prepared me for my first professional job when MTV hired me after college, because that was my first job after college, because I went back. And it was a little easier. Like if you'd already worked there for a summer, they don't have to like vet you from scratch. You're like, oh, we know this guy. So I went back, and my job was to be in the tape library. So anytime they did an interview, and again, it was MTV News and the special production. So it wasn't much to do with the videos or the VJs or whatever. But it was like anytime they interviewed some star and they like then they would cut them up into little bits and air them all over the place. So I was the one who literally with a Sharpie would put a number on the side of the tape and say, "Oh, the George Michael interview. That's 5735. It's right over here on the shelf." And that was my first job in the industry. Putting numbers on the side of tapes.
Wow. But you ran from there. I mean, you had some really big jobs after that, right?
Right. Yeah, at the
time.
time.
What was the first like big gig that you were excited about?
So I would say because it was still mid-'80s and MTV was still very much in the nascent years, it was a company where you could really move up fast. And you could go from putting numbers on the side of tapes to producing comedy programs in about 6 months, which is about what I did. So I worked in some of the special things. I mean, because I mentioned Live Aid, so I missed Live Aid because I wasn't working there yet. But the next big concert that they did was the Amnesty International. That was another big one with all the stars, like
I remember.
U2 and all that kind of stuff. And I was there at that and just like backstage and seeing like the Police and U2, and I'm like, there they all are. And I'm just, can I get you another coffee, Mr. Sting? Here you are. So that was really a big to do.
I have a memory of Peter Gabriel doing Biko at that stadium, and the entire crowd just pumping along. It was just this incredibly powerful moment.
Yeah. So that was fun. And again, still pretty low in the totem pole. I remember when I got my first promotion at MTV, because I'd been technically my title was production assistant, but again, it was such a small company and a creative company, and just whoever's doing it, just do it. And I would get like producer credit on a particular show. Like I worked on that show and I produced and all that, but I was still a production assistant. I remember my very first my first promotion, there was no good news, because up until then I was for some reason being paid hourly. And of course, like I said, sometimes they were 10 o'clock at night and screening tapes and stuff. And then there was going from that to salary. And I was like, I was going to be at my same desk. I was going to get the same credits on the shows. I was just going to be paid less. That was my first big promotion.
Health benefits. Did you get health insurance on the other side?
Back in the day, I don't know. It's probably still in my parents' program at that point.
Hey, it's something, right? So let's get the career trajectory right then. So how many years are you out of Syracuse and in that world, working in the MTV world? I think you also worked for Comedy Central, correct, for a little while?
Right. So in 1989, two things pretty simultaneously launched. Two different cable, back when it was just cable, it was before DirecTV, it was all the streaming, cable, two cable channels exclusively devoted to comedy. One was called The Comedy Channel, and one was called Ha, the TV Comedy Network. The latter was owned and created by MTV Networks, which was Viacom. Comedy Channel was HBO and Time Warner, both at the time very rival big media companies that wanted nothing to do with each other. And they both essentially launched not the same format, but they were both 24-hour comedy channels. Now, today we think, well, SiriusXM, how many do we have on there? We probably got like a ton of them. Yeah. But back then, there was such limited, what we call bandwidth, because it was just the number of cable channels. Like when I went home at night, I had a cable TV that had like 36 channels.
Right.
That was it. That was what the box had. Right, and it was the wooden box, and it had those buttons press.
Of course.
And it had a long...
And the dial that you could turn up and down.
A long tether. Yeah, 3 things on the dial, and then the buttons. And that equaled 36 because it was like 3 things.
Yep.
And 8, yeah.
3 rows of 12.
3 rows of 12. So I mean, really at that time, and what we heard about it as these two independent channels that had launched, the individual cable operators, which were not owned necessarily by these big conglomerates, they sort of ruled the roost. So if like in Cleveland, Ohio, the local cable company there wanted to add you as a channel, then you get added. If they didn't, then you didn't. And so the issue was, because there was such limited space out of the 36, well, we've got one for music, we've got one for sports, you got ESPN, you got CNN. We don't need 2 different channels just for comedy. Who would want all that comedy? So there was really kind of like a standoff where neither channel was getting added to a lot of cable systems. And the cable companies were essentially saying, we're just going to wait for one of you to fold or for the 2 of you to merge.
Right.
And they were both such stubborn, huge media conglomerates that they refused to fold. And they merged into Comedy Central. So that's what is now Comedy Central, was originally the Comedy Channel and Ha, and they merged together. And they part of it was it's kind of like when SiriusXM merged, similarly in terms of some of the staff and some of the programming merged and all that. And so, but before that, when it was Comedy Central, I left MTV because I was on the more producing and behind the scenes side. And I really, ever since college, so when I was in college, I did directing, and that was multi-camera directing, live directing is what I really was kind of looking forward to. So I had the opportunity to do that at the Comedy Channel, and I left. Oh, this is one of my claims to fame. If you guys I don't want to be too New York centric with the podcast.
It's okay.
But page 6 is the gossip column in the New York Post.
Course.
I was in page 6 because I was one of several people that had jumped ship from MTV, owned by Viacom, to create this new comedy channel owned by HBO and Time Warner, and everybody was sort of getting sick of it. And so I was at the tail end of that when people were starting to get ticked off that everybody was poaching all these folks. And then, of course, a year later they end up merging because got to make it work.
I hope you kept that. I hope you kept that newspaper.
I do have a clipping. I do have the page 6. Yeah, Dave Dwyer among others. So, but I was working comedy anyway at MTV. This great guy I worked with who died way too young in his 30s, named Bill Aiken, and he was one of their producers in the special program department that I was working at, that sometimes would do these kind of rockumentary things, but he really kind of took to the comedy piece, and we created a show called the Half Hour Comedy Hour. I should say he created. I shouldn't say we created. I was working with him, but it was called the Half Hour Comedy Hour, and this was like in the 80s when they used to use the phrase that comedy is the rock and roll of the 80s, that it was really having this huge boom of stand-up comedy, and people that were working clubs, but again, because there wasn't the prolific nature of television, they hadn't been on TV yet. So people that were on this show that I placed and lit and got cameras were like Ray Romano, Chris Rock, David Spade, Adam Sandler. I mean, this was and we were scouting these people. I would go to clubs and I go, oh, Pauly Shore, he's kind of funny. I'll write that down.
Oh, my goodness.
I mean, this is what the sort of advent of the big stand-up comedy boom. Of course, there was, like anything else, there was a bubble burst after that.
For that.
Yeah.
But I mean, if I go down through that, if I probably look back at those, the people that we were, and they had never done TV, so we shot them doing their stand-up set, but then we also would have them in little interviews and little skits with the hosts and stuff like that. And I didn't do the live in this comedy club stuff, but all the other stuff with these names that are now just like huge Jerry Seinfeld, these huge household names.
That's incredible.
Yeah, and it was just like this little show at MTV in the late 80s. This was like 87, 88, something like that. And then so when myself and a couple other people that were working on that show went to go and be part of the launch of the Comedy Channel, which became Comedy Central. And the concept of it when it first launched was kind of like MTV with comedy clips. So whereas Ha went with showing like old sitcoms, like here's Mary Tyler Moore that's not what everybody does now, like for 12 hours straight. But the idea of the Comedy Channel was mostly stand-up. So they would have little bits of stand-up, occasionally like movies, funny bits from movies. But it's sort of like when you're hanging out with your friends and you just remember like one bit, and then you all laugh together, and then you move on to something else. So it's kind of like that. So it was like little, as if they were music videos. It was a roughly 3 to 5 minute clip of either stand-up or some classic comedy movie, and they rotated them all, and they played them all in a big jumble, like a jukebox. And then the hosts that they refused to call VJs, because these were professional comedians,
right,
we're not VJs,
of course.
we're essentially VJs, throwing to these clips. And it's one thing, because if you're Mark Goodman and you're in the studio, and obviously not to burst anybody's bubble, most of that isn't like on radio live where they actually play the music. They just record all of the stuff that goes in between the videos, and then they put it all together later. So if you're Mark Goodman saying, boy, how about this new clip from Madonna? Look at her with that outfit. Okay. But if you're doing like comedy clips, you're like, okay, now here's that famous bit from Ray Romano that everybody knows. Right. Let's go to that now.
Right.
But the problem is we were trying to do more creative stuff in the in-between than just kind of a straight-up VJ segment. So those things eventually blossomed into to their own show. Yeah. And so what I was directing when I left the industry was a show called Night After Night with Alan Havey. He still did some stand-up, but I went on to do a lot of acting and like Breaking Bad and stuff. So, but I mean, essentially it was like a David Letterman show without the audience and without the ratings, but it was that kind of late night feel. And we did have, by the end, we had big name guests and stuff. And I was directing that show, and it was pretty much live to tape. We did it during the day, during the work day. Actually, just like they do the Tonight Show and all those. I mean, those aren't live either, except after the State of the Union address. But, but I mean, it was like that. And it was great. I got to get paid to laugh for a living, and say, well, this would be kind of a funny angle for that, prop comedy bit. Oh, let's do that. And that was my job, and it was fun, and I loved it. That's amazing. It was new every day, and then
so your career was soaring.
Yeah. Well, okay.
I mean, it seems like you were very much on the rise. You're in the middle of a whole new industry. And then I believe the next part of the story is you head out to Denver in 1993 and have an epiphany. Talk to us about that. I mean, that moment and what took you away from this industry.
Yeah, I mean, I will, while that is lovely, that's probably the memoir version, but I was, to be fair, when I went to World Youth, I was, as we say in freelancing work, I was between gigs,
Okay.
So the Night After Night show had ended. I'd been doing some freelancing and some other things. We did live television commercials for Prodigy Internet. Remember Prodigy before AOL became the big dog?
Yep. I do.
And their big selling point, and they hadn't done live commercials since like Jackie Gleason, cutting up the apple, Kenneth Corey
Interesting.
Apple. And so they decided to do live TV commercials, dropping into like sports games, into like the news and stuff. So we were there like at night, just like sitting around waiting, and like the talent would be on the set, and they're like rehearsing. They're ready. Okay, here it goes. Okay, here it comes.
That's got to be nerve-wracking too.
Oh my gosh,
like improv,
exactly. And one of the people that was the hosts of that, they had 3 different hosts. They had one who would appeal to women. Their name was Desi, I think, and a guy who still does sports here in New York area, Bruce Beck.
Sure,
he still does NBC Sports. Yep. So he did the sports stuff, and then. From Seinfeld, Elaine's boss, John O'Hurley, what was his name?
Okay. Mr. Peterman?
Mr. Peterman, who was actually my first cousin's college roommate at Providence College.
Oh, wow.
John O'Hurley.
No kidding.
So John O'Hurley, but again, of course he's got that great like voice. Now he does all the dog shows, right? He still does the dog shows?
Yep.
So, but he was just like at 30 seconds, and there was copy that they rehearsed, and they had little graphics that would come in and out, like live on Prodigy right now. So I was doing that in kind of the in-between and the freelance gig work, but I was really not with a big home run, regular full-time work, and that's why I had enough time to go to World Youth Day, and I spent a couple extra days. It was Colorado. I was like, hey, I've never seen those mountains. Let's go for a hike, And again, I had really been very much involved in church and faith and prayed, and I lectured at Mass, and I was still running retreats. I mean, again, it's what I thought people did when they got home from work, And it was the first time that I really had the sense that this is what God wanted me to do more with all of me, not just full time, but, all of who I am and all that. And one of my first reactions was like, wait, I thought you wanted me to do this. I've been doing this pretty well.
Right.
So what's interesting is when I would articulate that to people, like, I think God wants me to be a priest, but I've been doing all this. It would seem like that would be a waste. God doesn't seem to be all that frivolous. I mean, maybe we could look at some aspects of human history and go, maybe you might come to that conclusion. But at least in my life, had seemed like God would be so capricious to just change his mind and now do this, my puppet. So it seemed like there was some kind of purpose for all of that was to come. And when I would articulate that the way I just did to you, a lot of people would say, oh, hey, I've heard of this small community of priests called the Paulist Fathers, and they do what you do. Like, they do television, they do radio, they do films and stuff. So you should check them out. I'm like, oh, wait, you mean I could do both? That seems cool.
Yeah.
And I now know that that's much more by reputation. We're a very small community. We're the first American community of priests, founded by a New Yorker who was a convert to Catholicism in the 1850s. And it was when, it's only about 100 years of America, not even. And so it was very, at the time, not to get into historical or religious history or whatnot, but it was very mostly Protestant country. And if you watch Gangs in New York, for instance, you see how the Irish and the Italians were lower class citizens. So the Catholics were not. And it was not very. So Isaac Hecker, our founder, had this great vision that no, Catholicism is a great match for what this new experiment of America is. And we should kind of try to, we should spread the word, and we should staff parishes and give parish missions. So his vision was really to kind of Catholicize America, if you will. But also he realized the effectiveness of using sort of modern means, which at the time was magazine tract publishing, little pamphlets, like you'd see, somebody handing out in the subway. Some other denominations still do this. But I mean, he really had this belief that while we have ancient truths, we need to tell them in new ways and using new forms and new technology and whatever. Yeah. So he said that in 1858 and started what still is, and I had a board meeting today about this, Paulist Press, the oldest independent Catholic publishing company in the United States. So we still do books and now, of course, audiobooks and everything, podcasts and everything else. But that was his baby. And so over the course of the 20th century, we started doing radio. Where I'm standing right now, literally, was one of the first AM radio licenses given in the United States to the Paulist Fathers. A little AM radio station called WLWL was broadcast from actually the physical place where I'm standing right now, in the basement of our residence on 59th Street in Manhattan. So we had a little radio station, and it was kind of like the old school where there's the master control room. You got the guy with the old clunky headphones and almost like those little plugs like the operators had and whatnot. And then in the other room, you had the big stand mic and somebody just standing there with a piece of paper in their hand. And through the glass, somebody would point and go, "And now, here's the news. All right, coming to you now from WLWL."
Sure.
So I am literally standing where that happened.
That's amazing.
Which is pretty cool.
Yeah.
And I'm looking at the little window that would go through to what used to be the engineering room, but now, since we need much less smaller size equipment, it's now our exercise room for the Paulist priests.
Okay.
So it's no longer the control. But we retained this little kind of voiceover studio as the studio where I do the podcast and the radio show. So the Paulists were into radio, and then in the 60s got into television, a show that was on all over back before, as long as we're talking about the 80s, but before the deregulation of the Reagan era, where almost every publicly operated broadcast, TV or radio, was required by the FCC to have what they called educational programming. Usually they'd stick that on a Sunday morning when everybody's either sleeping in or going to church. And just like on your regular radio dial, but back in the terrestrial days, where the below the 90, that's where all your NPRs are, that was all kind of required. And so every television station in the country was supposed to have a certain amount hours of programming, and like they'll take it from wherever they can get it. And so the Paulist Fathers started producing this half-hour show that was not overly preachy or churchy. It was kind of like little morality plays, but because they were based, the priest that was doing it was based in Hollywood, it was people like Carol Burnett and Martin Sheen and Ben Vereen and John Amos and these Marion Ross and these big stars that were in these little kind of half-hour plays, and they would do it for like, well, I'll do it for Father Bud, sure, but they got to be bigger names, but they were still big names at the time, and people would tune in on Sunday morning to see like Carol Burnett, like working out some theological issue or some moral conundrum that she had in the little script that they wrote.
So interesting.
And he did it kind of like Twilight Zone, where at the end he would be sort of the moral, like he would kind of give you the moral of the story, the priest guy. And so that show aired for years and years. And people still come up to me and say, oh, I remember the Paulist Fathers because you guys had Insight and it was always on Sunday morning. So we did that. And then they got into film. They did a film about Archbishop Oscar Romero, who was assassinated in El Salvador, starring Raul Julia. That was our big kind of feature film in the late 80s, early 90s. Did a film about Dorothy Day as well, who's on track for sainthood. So, I mean, because the Paulists had done all of this before I even heard of who they were, but other people did. When I said this kind of stuff about becoming a priest, a lot of people said, well, I should check out the Paulists. I mean, they do radio, they do TV. I'm like, oh,
that's amazing.
That's interesting. Yeah.
Amazing.
And we're a very small community that, because of the impact of media, as we all know, it's only 3 of us, but how many people are listening? Lots of people. So we've always been able to what we call punch above our weight. So like the Jesuits, there's tens of thousands of Jesuits. There's only ever been, as at most at any one time, 200 or so Paulists. And right now we're down around 80. So, but we still make a big impact through Paulist Press. We still have Paulist Productions that still do things. We just did a documentary on baseball and a documentary on the military chaplains that were airing on PBS. So still do all this kind of stuff and still kind of get our word out there about our small little band of men because we use mass media. So kind of cool.
I mean, this is amazing, though, because you find out that this exists. You've had your own epiphany by listening to the Pope speak, and it's now resonating with you.
Yeah.
You find out it exists. I mean, here's a question most people don't know, including myself. You find this out, you seek them out. What is the process to becoming a priest? Like, what do? You write them a letter, give them a call? Like, I don't even know what you do.
Oh, there's even more involved now than there used to be.
I'm sure there is.
I mean, it would be in some ways akin to applying to either grad school or some sort of program, you have to get references and this is your priest growing up. He's like, I always thought he'd become a priest, that kind of thing.
Right.
And then obviously these days we have to do some psychological testing and background checks and all that kind of stuff. But then there's training. So it's essentially, it's roughly, depends on which diocese or which religious community, somewhere around 5, 6, 7 years of. Part of that is like schooling and learning, like studying the Bible and theology. But part of it is also continuing to prayerfully discern, is this really what? It's kind of like being engaged. So you haven't made the full life commitment yet. You've put a ring on it. But, these days, most times engagement moves forward. But I mean, there certainly was a time in our history where people would court and engagement would be kind of, okay, let's part our separate ways. So, really, some of the guys that'll discern after a year, a couple of years, is just like, this is great. Love you guys, but just not for me, or I feel called to something else or whatever. And then part of it is essentially like a double master's. So it's 4 or 5 years of school of philosophy and theology and various other things. They also have to teach us like how to do stuff. Where do you stand when you say mass? What do you do with your hands?
Process, right?
Yeah. What does it say in the book? Okay. Right. What does that mean? Yes. So we learn, kind of the why and the stuff behind, but also the procedural stuff. Right. And you're also trained what we call pastorally. Like one of the things that we will do at roughly the midpoint of a 5-year seminary, get out of the classroom, and in our case, we take a full year where we're not doing the academics, but we go and work at a church somewhere, not fully as a priest, because there's some things you can't do, but you're kind of like, you're on the staff, you're working along with them, and they're like, oh, he's like a baby seminary, and he's like an internship, essentially.
Internship.
Like, so you do like a year of an internship, essentially. Okay. And then part of that is also discerning, because, if you have a call to seminary, you may not have a call to the priesthood, and vice versa. So, I mean, it's kind of like medical school. Not a lot of doctors say, I really was looking forward to medical school. So, you got to make sure that you like what you're going to be doing and not just, I love the studying part. Great, go be an academic. It doesn't mean you should be a priest. So this internship year is partly getting your feet wet, getting what it does. But one of the other things we do that year is essentially like a hospital rotation. Forgive me, I'm completely addicted to The Pit right now. I don't know why they don't dump all the episodes at once. I want a bench. So yes. they put us as like a chaplain, even though you're not even ordained yet. They put you as a chaplain in a situation like that. Like I went to a level 1 trauma hospital for my hospital rotation. They call it CPE, Clinical Pastoral Education, because the idea is you're not just learning like just like on any of those good shows, you're not just learning the procedure, you're learning about what it is for you. So when we say pastoral education, it's kind of like just because you know the Bible or are a good orator doesn't mean you have the skills to like accompany somebody when they're going through a really difficult time. Like those aren't necessarily all the same skill sets. So you try to kind of get trained on all that stuff. And so my first night on call, there was it was a level 1 trauma hospital in Tennessee. So they would medevac people in from like the hinterland that had shot each other with like shotguns, and they're like husbands and wives and stuff laying open on the table. And there I am, and I got like a little beeper. This is back in the days. I'm like, okay, hi, I'm the chaplain, and it turns out I was in Eastern Tennessee, which at the time was like less than 1% Catholic. So they see somebody walk in because you're wearing the little collar, little chaplain outfit. And they would assume that it's like the worst, like the bad
last
news.
rites.
Not that,
yeah.
Well, yeah. They don't assume you're coming to give them comfort. And I remember walking into a room and this woman just like, don't you tell me my daddy's dead. I don't want to hear it. She's like covering her ears. Don't you? I don't know that he is. I was just seeing if you're okay. Just wanted to pray or something. Here I am, little wet behind the ears kid, not even a priest yet. So part of the process is those kind of things. So it's not merely like doing a PhD in theology. I mean, that a master's is part of that, but it's also those kind of human elements. In the same way that if you were a social worker, you would need, in fact, my co-host on the radio show is God is MSW, Master in Social Work. So he does all the academia, but then he's got like something like 3,000 hours of supervised ministry where he's learning on the job and he's got somebody mentoring him and saying, well, I wouldn't have said it that way, that kind of stuff.
Right.
So it's somewhat similar to that process as well.
So you're learning, this is actually one of my questions. So you're learning from reps, you're learning from experience versus, like, are there psychology courses through this process? Like, how do you get that training to be compassionate, which might just be human nature, but to listen and to be able to advise and guide, et cetera, et cetera?
Yeah, I mean, there's enough that people can choose to sort of specialize, like electives in college or whatever.
Yeah.
So, I mean, or in med school, like, I want to do pediatrics. So there would be some people that would kind of get a little more training and education in something like spiritual direction, or if somebody really thinks they want to be a professor of Bible, then they'll probably learn Greek and Hebrew and all that. So there's enough leeway that some people would have. But I mean, the point you bring up, Larry, is a good one, that many people in the pews expect every single priest who's wearing a white collar to be equally skilled at all of these things, and that is not necessarily the case. I mean, some people are just more gifted at something than the other. When we were talking about my time in high school as a high school youth, I was one of the volunteer kids that would like run some of the stuff. And my very good friend Warren was also very involved. But the way Warren described it is that he was the one-on-one guy that people that would come to if they're like, their boyfriend broke up with them. And I was the 1-on-30 guy. I was the one that gave the talks that riled everybody up. It was like, yay, God. And he was the more, and it's like, and honestly, both of those things are somewhat expected of a priest. Yeah. So I would say, I don't think I am, even to this day, as good at the kind of like really sit down and active listening and all that as somebody else who's more experienced and more trained in spiritual direction. I don't think I'm as good at that, but then I would say in all humility, there's probably some priests that are not as good at the orator stuff.
Got it.
Yeah.
Did you ever have any doubts going through that process? Were there any moments where you asked the question, is this really for me?
That's ideally what they're wanting you to ask all the time. I mean, and they do prod that. So it's not just kind of a presumption. And even though there's what one might call a shortage of priests these days, it's not just like, well, let's just move them through. So yeah, that that question is kind of underlying everything for the better part of that 5 or 6 years. I would say for me, whether it's kind of a unique blessing or whatever, it was always a matter of further or more deeply affirming the call rather than is this or not. But to give an example, one of my classmates who I started with in the novitiate, which is our first year, even before you do any academic study, you do kind of like a year of prayer. It's kind of like a year-long retreat and discernment. So I started with him, and we were coming up on what we term our final profession or final vows, where we make our final commitment. It's kind of like getting married. In fact, even distinct from ordination. So when we make our commitment to the religious community, the Paulists or Jesuits or Franciscans, that is more equivalent to getting married in that is our commitment for life, that we've committed to this community. Because some communities do have some guys that are brothers and monks and aren't priests, and so making that life commitment. So that's about 5 years into 5 years into the process. And my classmate, who had started at the same time as we were literally submitting to the printer the names to put on the invitation for our final profession, and he hadn't decided yet.
There you go.
And he was, we called him Hamlet. It's like every day I was like, to be or not to be. And God bless him. I sympathize with how difficult that must have been.
Yeah.
And that it's almost always a choice between goods. It's not like, am I going to choose to be an axe murderer or Florence Nightingale? It's usually both of these things are good for me and would be uses of my gifts, but I don't know which one. And that's, and I would say not to mock him, but probably more to compliment him. People that have a lot of gifts have more of a difficult time with that. If there's one thing you're good at, well, then there you go. That's pretty easy. So he was honestly, we really had to kind of say, we got to call the printer tomorrow. Are you in or out, buddy? After 5 years.
What did he decide? Was he in?
No.
Did he go forward?
No. He did not.
He walked away.
Yeah,
there
he
you
did.
go.
Yeah.
We got about 10 minutes left here, so we'd be remiss if we didn't talk about Busted Halo. So let's talk about Busted Halo and how that came about with Sirius, and let's talk about all of that. Because you're happy, Dave, the priest, and things are going well for you, but like this other amazing thing happens in your life. Talk about it. How did it come about?
Yeah, I had to tack on Father, so it's Father Happy Dave.
Father Happy Dave. Or is it Happy Father Dave?
Well, it's a small inner circle that uses that moniker. So, it does actually have to do with that because when people introduced me to the Paulist Fathers, it was largely because, hey, this kid does TV and these guys do that. Let's put them together. But once that handshake was made, really, my discernment was much more about, wow, this is a band of guys that I want to hitch my wagon to. I feel a kinship to how they look at life and church, and I wouldn't mind growing old, and here we are in the Paulist nursing home together. But also the particular mission that gets really pretty inside baseball in terms of, the Catholic Church is... We've got a catechism that says this is what we believe, and we've got theology that has been honed by Thomas Aquinas 1,000 years ago. But there's a lot of different approaches and a lot of different ways. And so, like, would I have joined the Franciscans? I thought about that for a while, but discerned no. Not because they're bad or because I disagree with any of their theology. It's just like, it's a little different. It's just not quite the right fit. And so that's really what happened during my entire time of seminary discernment, and even my first couple of years after being ordained a priest, was that, I'm so glad that it was kind of like God's little way of, making me do TV and radio so that I would find this great group that's great for me. But honestly, even since the first couple of months with discerning and doing the process that I just described with the Paulist Fathers, I really didn't have the desire to also do media. I really just thought that was what got me to the door. That was God's way of kind of, the winding road. And here I am. And I was working as a campus ministry priest in Boulder, Colorado, a place that I would still be living today. And most people that move there don't ever move away. And yet they say, shh, don't tell anybody. We don't want everyone to come here. It's so beautiful. It was a great congregation. It was my first, they always say, your first church, your first assignment, you're going to have a special affinity for.
Of course.
Loved being a priest. I was just doing kind of your basic stuff. It was like baptisms and weddings and preaching every Sunday and retreats with the college kids and nothing that had anything to do with television or radio. I was fine with that. I was loving that. And then I get the call from the headquarters. And this ministry that at the time wasn't called Busted Halo, was started about the same year that I got ordained. So we're celebrating the 25th birthday of Busted Halo.
Happy birthday.
Because the Paulist Fathers decided to provide something for the American church that would particularly resonate with younger people, young adults, 20s and 30s, which in the 90s, there was a big push from the American bishops. It's like, we're losing all this demographic. What are we going to do, fellas? Let's go. Somebody think of something. So we're like, okay, we Paulist, we'll try it. We'll try to do this. So a couple of our guys got together and they asked some young people, get together a couple of focus groups, like we do when we're starting a media entity. Got some focus groups together and said, what do you think we should do? And they said, we should really have a website. And mind you, this is 1999, 2000. Website. Oh, okay. How do you do a website? Let's do that. Let's do a website. So, and then it was one of the focus groups of people in like their college age or 20s that came up with the name Busted Halo, which essentially says that, it sometimes seems like people in religion are holier than thou, and they're all the ones with the halos, but the reality is none of us are saints until we get to be with God in heaven. So we've all got these busted halos that we're walking around with and working on maybe polishing up or repairing, but they're not going to be perfect in this life anyway. Sure. So they just loved that concept, and it was more approachable, and it's kind of admitting that, the church is not a divinely perfect institution. It's made up of us humans, and we're all kind of busted and wounded healers and all that. So they came up with that name. They were doing the ministry, which was almost entirely at the time a website. They launched the website about a year after starting that. So the website was only about 2 or 3 years old when I got that infamous call in Colorado saying, please leave me here for the rest of my life. I love it. Love being a priest. I'll just stay at this parish. And then like, no, I want you to come to New York. I'm like, New York? Oh, I can't breathe there.
It's a higher calling.
It was lower, 5,000 feet lower calling. Right. So I lowered myself by 5,000 feet to accept this. And honestly, I was saying to myself, I don't know. If I still wanted to be doing media, I would have stayed in media.
Right.
Not become a priest. I love being a priest. And I'm like, okay, I'll give this like 2 years and see how it goes. And this was 2004, which was really right around the advent, the real advent of podcasts. They were really just kind of being invented, a thing of somebody who wrote, I think, the original definitive book for somebody wanting to start out with podcasting. And again, this is like 2004, 2005, was one of the guys that I did morning radio with at Syracuse, and who I just, in fact, had lunch in LA with last week. So, I mean, this was like nobody even knew what it was, or where do you buy a microphone, and how do you do what's a stream or a syndicated thing, or how do we get it out there? How does it go in the feed and all that kind of stuff? And so we just decided that this was, these guys that were doing the website, when they hired me, I'm like, I'm not like a print editor kind of guy. I'm more like with the people. And so I was about a year into this experiment that I was saying, well, I don't know if I want to do this or go back to being a regular old priest at a parish. We started up this podcast that we called the Busted Halo podcast. And we're doing it for less than a year when I heard that at the time, Sirius Radio, before the merger. Yeah, before the merger of SiriusXM. Sirius
That's
Radio.
How we started. Yep.
It was soon after they hired Howard. They approached the Archdiocese of New York to start a Catholic channel. And as we all know, the business model is that you get like a niche audience and you have a channel just for that. And there you got subscribers out of that. So when they see, for instance, NASCAR, when they teamed with NASCAR, you got 80 million NASCAR fans. That's 80 million subscriptions that want to hear that guy inside the car going, ooh, coming around the bend. And when they see 60 million Catholics, just as a demographic, they go, well, if we've got a channel that they can't get anywhere else, we got some subscribers. So they approached the Archdiocese of New York, which is where I was living at the time, having just moved back from Colorado, and started up this little teeny podcast, like a half hour once a week or something. And I heard that they were starting this. And because I had been a part of the launch of Comedy Central and some other things that got off the ground, I know that when you're starting up something at first, you don't have all the stuff to fill in the 2 o'clock in the morning and the 3 in the morning stuff. Right. So I sent over a CD and I said, if you guys want, you just put this on at 2 in the morning, and as long as it plays the Busted Halo name, that might be good for us. We'll get a few hits on the website. And then they called. That was another phone call that I got and said, we want you to do a show every day on the Catholic channel. Wow. And I was like, dope. That's not exactly what. But then as you can see, like it's always clear in the rear view mirror.
Right.
I can now see like, okay, that's how all of this fits together.
Yes.
That's what God was having me do when I was in first grade. And that's why I was attracted to the Paulist fathers, but then loved being a priest. So, I mean, one of the things I said when they first offered that as let's do a show every day is like, okay, but to be fair, if you guys want a priest on the radio, I also still need to be a priest. So I'm not going to like leave all the ministry that I do, and I'm still going to celebrate Mass and and they say, yeah, sure, that's what we want. So essentially it was just like, okay, you can handle it. It's essentially 2 jobs. I'm like, okay, I'll do 2 jobs.
Yeah.
With a massive audience.
When we first went on, it was 7 to 10 p.m.
Okay.
At night. And the Catholic Channel, when they launched the Catholic Channel in 2006, right? Yeah, it'll be 20 years this year. So when they launched in 2006, in December 2006, it was live, original program from 6 a.m. to midnight. Different shows, different hosts. So they were really like ramping it up. And so they had me do kind of like the evening here on the East Coast, but it would have been afternoon drive for folks in the West and a little bit in between and all those other time zones that there apparently are in the middle, aside from the 2 on the edge. So they asked me to do that. And the people that we were working with, who all got very good at their jobs, but nobody had ever done live radio before. I'd never done that talk radio before. I did music radio. You talk for like a minute, and then you play 10 minutes of songs. You like
exactly
filing your nails.
Pee, you put on Leonard Skinner.
Reading the liner notes in the back. I wasn't talking for 52 minutes an hour.
Right.
So nobody had done this before, and I was really one of the few that had any sort of media production experience. So even though we were on at 7 o'clock, I was getting to the studios over at Rockefeller Center at our offices like 2 in the afternoon. So I really did have pretty much 2 full-time jobs because I was doing the other thing from 9 in the morning until 2. And I go, bye, I got to go over there to my other office over there at Rockefeller Center. And then we'd go on for 7 to 10. So thankfully, after 11 years, I did the Johnny Carson negotiating. I'm like, we need to cut this down a little bit. Fewer hours, maybe a different time. So thankfully now we're on from 6 to 8. I get done with my day at 8 p.m. instead of 10 p.m., which is a big difference in terms of life. Even for a priest, yes, I would occasionally have friends and go out to dinner, socialize. Didn't do any of that for 11 years.
Can you feel the impact that you made?
I mean, we hear of it. People tell us all the time. In fact, when I first got that call about, hey, let's not just hand them a half-hour podcast, let's really move into this full-time. Yeah. One of the questions that we had in our mind is, would this programming really just be for what we call the pew potatoes, people that are already there and already have buy-in to Catholicism and are just the real dyed-in-the-wool folks. And there is a lot of programming out there. I mean, it's kind of like a lot of we didn't even realize this 20 years ago, but it's a lot of how our siloed media now is just kind of an echo chamber and reinforces what everybody thinks and believes anyway. So it's nothing really new. We were concerned that we'd just be talking to the front row of pews. And pretty much every week for the last 20 years, we've heard of people who say, I got a new car, I was flipping around the dial, and I found your channel. I'm like, this can't be right. Is this really a priest on here? And I've had people coming back to the practice of the faith, returning to church for the first time in a long time, going to confession for the first time. And that's why I do it. Yes, I love the people that already love the church. We'll give them a hug. But really what is my passion and what motivates me and the Paulist Fathers and why we do the media and what we do, what our founder would have envisioned back in 1858, is reaching people that are not there every Sunday. And maybe after hearing one show, they're not instantly converted to being a regular church-going Catholic, but we definitely are making an impact. And only I know that because people tell us that all the time. It's very humbling and moving.
Of course.
And I can say that, over the years, I have listened from time to time. I love listening to Father Dave. Your stories, your energy, the way that you're animated, and it relates. You make the content relatable. And the times that I have listened, I have genuinely enjoyed it. So I do thank you for doing what you do.
Thank you. And thanks for having me. Thanks for hearing about my little story.
Yeah.
Well, it's fascinating and so incredibly unique, which is why we wanted to have you on.
Thank you.
Father Dave Dwyer, you could check out his show, The Busted Halo Show, SiriusXM from 6 to 8 Eastern, Monday to Friday, unless it's changed. Did I get that right?
Also available. That is correct. Also available for free, because if people don't have subscription to SiriusXM, we podcast a couple of half hours a week on BustedHalo.com.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Check that out. Father Dave, thank you so much for joining us today.
Sure. Thank you guys for having me. Great to see you guys again.
So that was Father Dave of Busted Halo Ministries and SiriusXM, who just gave us an unbelievably modern look at career journeys, media, and faith. That was such a unique and different conversation and great conversation. Larry Shea, what are your key takeaways?
Yeah, I mean, we've been over a lot of professions at this point, I feel like, right? We've talked to a lot of people, and we often talk about how we finish an interview and we say, that person's just built for this, right? Like, they're doing exactly what they need to be doing in life. And is there any doubt in anybody's mind that Father Dave is doing exactly what he should be doing in life? I mean, I feel like I'm a better person just for knowing him. Let me be real about that. He's just such a joy to talk to, and you could tell how much he enjoys helping others and being a priest and being able to help people on a day-to-day basis. He's in the exact automobile, going down the exact road in the exact place he needs to be. And I don't know. I get so much out of it every time I talk to him. And it's just a cool story about a great person who's doing exactly what they need to be doing in life and enriching the lives of everybody that he touches. And I learned so much about it. I had no idea the process of becoming a priest.
I thought
he
that
called
was
it
fascinating.
He called it like getting a double master's, And that's kind of, you see it now, because it is easy to see that somebody who can speak in front of others may not be great helping someone in their moment of need. Somebody who manages all the services, may do that better than the one-on-one stuff. Like, it's just, there are specialties and there are things that different priests do. And I just want to thank him for kind of sharing all of that. And he's exactly doing what he needs to be doing. We love it.
Absolutely. And for me, it's such a great testament to, and this is a selfish comment I'm about to make, but to our show, because he's living proof that, there are no wrong choices, on the pathway to success. Because if you believe in yourself, and if you put yourself out there, and if you keep moving your feet, and if you keep gravitating towards your passions and keep those a part of your life and a part of your story, organically, sometimes things can really work out, and you can wind up in the place that you were always meant to be. And I think we've seen that several times in the stories that we've been able to explore as part of this podcast, but nobody personifies that better than Father Dave. It's like he wound up exactly where he was meant to be, and it's just such an incredible story. And as you talk about him helping other people, I didn't know him well. I knew him a little bit from the time that I was at SiriusXM, but he was always smiling. He was always up. The presence that he brought to any room that he was in was not only positive, but it was also a word that we use a lot on this podcast, authentic. It was real. It was genuine. And, it was a great pleasure for me to get to know Father Dave during my time at SiriusXM.
Yeah, same. And he's like that, right? You'd see him in the hallway and you couldn't help but smile with him, just for seeing him and talking to him. And I thought it was really interesting that he said, I asked him, do you think you would have gone to this vocation had you not seen the Pope speak? And he says, I was kind of on that path anyway. And I thought that was really interesting that, I do feel that even if he hadn't gone on that particular trip and seen the Pope speak on that particular day, and that it moved him so much, that he would have found a way to this anyway.
For sure.
Right? You just get that feeling because of how he lives his life and how he enriches others and brings this amazing gift of storytelling and connection to the microphone. And he's able to share not just, his faith, but a real sense of humanity. And I want to thank him for that, because he's a great listen. Go listen to his show. He's amazing and just a wonderful person to know.
Absolutely. And if you do want to listen to his show, make sure you check out Busted Halo, 6 to 8 Eastern on SiriusXM's The Catholic Channel. It's a great listen. I've checked it out. And, whether you're a person of faith or not, it is an absolutely fascinating listen that you will take something away from. So, Father Dave, thank you so much for joining us on this episode of No Wrong Choices. We also thank you for joining us. If this episode made you think of somebody who could be a great guest, please let us know via the contact page of our website, which can be found at norwrongchoices.com. You can also connect with us on LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. On behalf of Larry Shape, Tushar Saxena, and me, Larry Samuels, thank you again for joining us.